So I want to tell you a story this morning that comes from the Hebrew Scriptures, the portion of our Bible that we call the Old Testament. It's a story about a man named Abraham. If you've done some reading in the Hebrew Scriptures, you probably have read something about Abraham. Abraham, at one particular point in time in his life, God came to him and God said, I want you to pick up everything that you have. I want you to gather all of your people, and I want you to walk with me through the wilderness to a new place to call home. Abraham says to God, well, I'm not sure where all this is going to take me, and I'm not sure where we're going, but okay, let's go. And so they set out on this journey, and throughout this traveling journey, God reveals something to Abraham. God says, I want you to feel the sand underneath your feet. And I want you to see the stars that are up in the sky. And I want you to understand that your descendants, your extended family, is going to be bigger than the sand that you can count and the stars that you can see. Here's the thing, though. Abraham and his wife, Sarah, had no children. God was promising him descendants, but he had no children. And anybody that saw Abraham and Sarah would say both of these two, beyond any human understanding, are well beyond the age of producing children. But here again, Abraham took God at his word and chose to keep on following, even when he couldn't understand. So time passes, years pass, actually. And throughout that time, God reveals this promise to him over and over and over again. And the longer they travel, the older Abraham and Sarah are getting, and there's still no children there. So eventually, Sarah decides that maybe God needs a little help in fulfilling his promise. So he tags one of his maids, a woman named Hagar, and says, I'm going to give Hagar to Abraham, and perhaps through Hagar, I will have the joy of having a child. And she presents this idea to her husband, Abraham. And do you know what Abraham's response was? Okay. And sure enough, Hagar conceives, and Ishmael is born. Abraham loves this boy because he thinks to himself, here it is. Here's the start of the promise. Here's the beginning of this extended family that's going to be bigger than the stars in the sky. But God never reneged on the promise that it would be Abraham and Sarah that would have a child. And so when Ishmael is 14 years old, Sarah delivers Isaac, the promise that was to come. Now, by this time, Sarah is 90 years old. Abraham is 100 years old. I want you to think for a minute about the aches and pains that you have in your body. And I want you to think for a minute that all of a sudden, at this particular point in time, with the aches and pains in your body, God decides that you are going to have a newborn. But that's the way it worked. Sarah nurses Isaac for about 3 years until the time when he's weaned. And as was the custom in that time, when a child is weaned, the family often threw a big party. And so at this party, Ishmael is there. Isaac is his stepbrother, after all, and Ishmael's 17 by this time. And Sarah catches a glimpse of Ishmael standing there at the party, and she turns to Abraham and says, that boy will not have any share with my son. Abraham has a problem. He loves both of his boys, loves his wife, but he's got this domestic situation unfolding in front of him. What is he supposed to do? How's he supposed to deal with this? And he doesn't quite know what he's supposed to do. And here's why. Because you see, when Hagar moves from being the maid of Sarah to being Ishmael's mom, her status in the family changes. In the culture of that day, when that happens, then Hagar actually becomes the wife of Abraham. Which means that it is her firstborn son that becomes the heir to everything that Abraham has. You got that? That's how that works. Sarah says, I'm not playing that game. God promised that it would be her son that would be the heir and the father of the multitude. Well, you can imagine where Abraham is in this, can't you? What am I supposed to do about this, God? God tells Abraham, take a breath. Take a deep breath. Both of these boys, he says to Abraham, matter in the story. But it will indeed be Isaac, through whom the multitude will come. But God tells Abraham, I also have plans for Ishmael. And so God says to Abraham, I want you to listen to what your wife tells you about this situation. Your wife says, send her away. Listen to her. So that's what Abraham does. He packs some food up and some water, and he gives them to Hagar and Ishmael, and then sends Hagar and Ishmael away from his family. Where does Hagar go? Well, think about it. If you've just kind of been cast out from a place, or something about your living arrangements don't work, it's often the inclination to go home, isn't it? To make your way back to people who care about you. That's what Hagar does. She sets out for Beersheba. That's where she's from. But here's the problem. Between where she was with Abraham and where Beersheba is, there's this desert in between that she has to travel through. And the more they travel, the less water they have. Until finally the moment comes when the water runs out. And the longer they travel in the desert without any water, the more she becomes aware that they're not going to make it. So she sits Ishmael down under a bush. It's probably not much more than a shrub. And Genesis 21 says she walks a bow shot away, probably 25 or 30 yards away from where Ishmael is. She falls down. She collapses in prayer. She says to God, I just can't sit here and watch my son die. Ishmael knows that something pretty serious is going on because he can see his mom weeping, and that causes him to start to cry. And here's what Genesis chapter 21 says. God heard the boy crying. God heard the weeping of Ishmael, and sends an angel to bring a message to Hagar. And the message to Hagar is, are you ready? Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Because see, I've got you and I've got your son. I have plans for him. Plans that are much, much bigger than this particular moment in time. And then God opens Hagar's eyes. And all of a sudden she sees a well of water there that wasn't there before. And she gets up and she draws water, and she now is able to continue the journey. Chapter 21 verse 18 says this, lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation. Now I want you to circle in this story the fact that God meets Hagar right where she is. You might say that at this particular point in time, Hagar is at the end of her rope. She doesn't know what she's going to do. She's at the end of her rope, and God meets her there. When she feels like the only thing left to do is die, God shows up and says, your stories don't end here. There's so much more to come. I wonder if you've ever heard this before. When you come to the end of your rope, tie a knot and hang on. You ever heard that one before? How many of you have heard that one? Hello, you out there? You heard that one? How many of you have seen that in a picture with a kitten hanging on the end of a rope like that? Yeah. Right. It's actually, the quote is actually attributed to Franklin Roosevelt. They say he used it during the time of the Great Depression in America, and he used it to try to inspire Americans that even when things seem hopeless, you can always find a little bit of strength to keep on moving ahead. So I guess my question to you this morning is that just something you've heard? Or does that describe some times in your life when you've reached the end of your rope and you have a choice? You either let go and fall, or you tie a knot and you hang on. Have you been, friends, in your life where Hagar was? At the end of your rope. Here's the thing. It's scary there, isn't it? It's not a pleasant place to be. At the end of your rope is a fear-filled place. It made me think this week, I don't know why it made me think about this, but it did. My bride, my beloved bride, and I, when we go to amusement parks, my bride loves to ride most of the rides that you get in an amusement park. Like, for example, if we go to Kennywood, she'll ride the Tilt-A-Whirl. You remember the Tilt-A-Whirl, right? And she'll ride the Barren Curve, which is that thing that goes around in circles real fast. And she'll ride some of the roller coasters, and she'll ride some of the water slides. But there's one type of ride my bride will not get on. It's a ride that looks like this. No way you're getting her on this. Why? Because her feet are dangling. And she absolutely cannot stand for there not to be something under her feet to support where she is. That's a scary place to be, isn't it? When you feel like your feet are dangling and you're hanging from the end of your rope and there's nothing underneath there to support you. It's a scary place to be, especially when you don't know how long you can hang on. When you've tied the knot and you just don't know how much longer you can hang on, that's a fear-filled place to be. I'll bet if we would take a minute and name some of the ropes that we find ourselves hanging at the end of, we could put some names to those things, don't you think? How many of you have hung from the rope of depleted financial resources before? Yeah. How many of us perhaps have hung from the rope of a terminal diagnosis, an illness that we've been told might end in death? How about a change in employment? Sometimes we feel like we're hanging at the end of that rope because we're not really sure what it's going to be like. Do I have what it takes for this new place? How about change itself? Isn't change a 4-letter word for us? Isn't it? Think about it. We don't like change. Change can bring its own set of fears. I know for a fact that there are some of us listening to me right now that would say the end of that rope is the end of a relationship. And we're not sure what tomorrow will be. Will I be alone? Or will I find somebody? I don't know about you, but I find myself more and more hanging at the end of a rope that I'll simply call "this world has gone crazy." And the fear that comes with it, what's going to become of us? I think we all find our ways. Maybe it's not now, maybe it's at different points in our lives. We find ourselves to the end of a rope that we can name. And here's what I want you to understand. Whatever rope you might find yourself at the end of, Hagar's story helps us. And here's why. There in the desert, you could probably give a whole bunch of different names to the ropes that she was hanging from. There's no water. In a place where there's no water. I've been abandoned by my husband's father and his family. I'm a single mom now. If I do make it home, what will the reception be? Where's God in all of this? If you caught in the way the story was told, God seems to be talking to everybody except Hagar. Where's God in the midst of this? She finds herself hanging from the end of her rope. She collapses in prayer and finally says, God, what are you doing? And here's what I want you to get. It's right at that moment that God meets her. It's right in that place where it looks like everything is about ready to collapse. That's where He meets her. And God shows her provision for the moment that she's in. And then God talks about a future. There is going to be hope. This moment that you're in right now is not the end of your story. It is just a moment. There's much more to come. I came across these verses from Psalm 102 this week, and every time I read these verses, I just have to stop and be in awe. I hope you process this. Psalm 102:25 says, in the beginning you, and anytime you catch you in these verses, that's a reference to God. In the beginning, you laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. We probably all would say that. God put the foundations of the world in place. God set the stars in the heavens. That's up to God. But now watch this. They will perish. What will perish? The foundations of the earth, stars in the heaven. They'll all perish. But God, you will remain. They will all wear out like a garment. Like clothing. You'll change them. And they'll be discarded. But God, you remain the same. And your years will never end. Okay, Pastor, what in the world does that mean? Well, let me tell you what it means. If God, in fact, remains the same, and if God's years never end, then here's the truth. If God met Hagar at the end of her rope, He's going to meet you at the end of yours. If God stays the same, then God's going to tell you what He told her. This is just a moment in your journey. Your story doesn't end here. And watch this. Because God remains the same throughout the years, He gives you the same invitation that He gave to Hagar. Let me open your eyes and let me see that I'm here in this hard place where you are. Let me provide for you here. And then He invites you to let go of that rope that you've been hanging on and trust that He's there to catch you. The verse of Scripture in Genesis 21 that really grabbed me was this one. Then God opened her eyes, opened Hagar's eyes, and she saw a well of water. And when she saw that well of water, did you catch what she did? She said, oh, wow, a well of water. Huh. That's not what she did. What did she do? She got up, she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. See, when God meets you at the end of your rope, sisters and brothers, and provides for what you need, don't just look at it, do something with it. Trust that God is there. Act on what God has revealed to you. And don't miss the part about giving the boy a drink. In fact, the Scripture actually says, doesn't even indicate in any way that Hagar takes a drink at all. I mean, I'm sure she did. She was thirsty, right? But her focus is that she gives the boy a drink. She passes on what she had received. See, when God meets you at the end of your rope and provides what you need, there's purpose in that. He provides for what you need at the end of your rope so that you can pass it on to other people who are at the end of theirs. Reminded me of a story. It comes from our Jewish brothers and sisters. Maybe you've heard about it before. It's called the parable of the spoons. A story about a rabbi who is given the opportunity to visit both heaven and hell. He chooses to go to hell first. And when he gets there, he is amazed by the setting. He sees row after row after row of long tables. And around all of the tables are people, and the tables are stacked full of the most sumptuous, amazing food that you could possibly imagine. But he noticed that the people who are sitting around the table and around all of this sumptuous food looked horribly emaciated. They were terribly starved. And he wondered why. And he walked up to one of the tables and he learned why they were starving. See, everybody's arm had a spoon in the hand, but their elbows were splinted. There were wooden planks on either side of the arm, so the elbow couldn't bend. You getting the picture? So they could dip their spoon into the food, but they couldn't get it to their mouth. Oh, that's why they were starving. He went to heaven after that. He was absolutely astounded to find that the setting was almost exactly the same. There were lots of rows of tables, and there were people around the tables, and there was this amazing food on top of the tables. But the difference was these people around the tables were joyful, and they were well fed, and they were excited, and they were laughing and enjoying the moment. But when he walked up to the table, he noticed that the situation for the people in heaven was the same as the people in hell. They held a spoon in their fist and they had splints on either side of their arm so they couldn't bend their elbow to feed. And he wondered, how in the world are these people joyful and the other ones are not? And then he watched something happen. The person sitting next to him or in front of him took their spoon and dipped it into the sumptuous food in front of them and stretched across the table and fed the person across the table from them. And that person just reveled in the wonder of that food. And then that person took the spoon in front of them and dipped it into the food in front of them and reached across the table and fed the person across the table that had fed them. And the rabbi was so thrilled. He said, "Oh, I've learned the secret. I can't wait to get back to hell and tell the people how to resolve their situation." And so he gets back to hell and he says, "I have the answer for you. I know exactly what you need to do. Just take that spoon at the end of your fist and fill it and feed the person next to you." And the man that he said that to said, "I will not." Do you think I'm going to share anything that's mine with that low-down, miserable person? I would rather starve than share what I have with him. The difference between heaven and hell. When God meets you at the end of your rope, He does provide for you. But He does it so that you can provide for others at the same time. So, this week, seriously, when you reach the end of your rope, tie a knot and hang on. Not because you don't have any other options, but because if the Hagar story is right, when you tie a knot at the end of your rope, get ready. God's about ready to show up there. And God will provide for you in that place. One more story that has been with me this week. Max Lucado tells it. A story about a friend of his that got a letter in the mail from the Internal Revenue Service. How many of us are excited about getting that letter? Yeah. So the letter said to this particular man, "We've done some early calculations and it turns out that you owe the IRS a fairly large sum of money. Money that this man did not have and had no idea where to get it." And then the letter said, "Expect another letter from us in just a few short weeks, and it will detail all of the money that you owe and the timeline for which you have to pay it back." Well, as the weeks are going, The man is absolutely panicking. Think about it, wouldn't you be? Man is panicking. What's this letter going to say? Finally, the letter arrives. And he pulls it out of the mailbox, looks at it and says, I just can't open it. And he walks into his office and lays it on the desk and leaves it there. For 5 days, he leaves it there. And in these 5 days, he can't sleep. He can't eat. He's irritable. He just is a miserable, miserable person. Finally, he says, I can't take this anymore. On day 6, he walks into his office, grabs the letter, opens it up, and what he finds is not a bill to be paid, but a check to be cashed. See, the IRS had miscalculated. And it wasn't that he owed them money, they actually owed him money. But he spent 5 days fretting about that out of fear. The fear that at the end of his rope there would be nothing there. See, here's what happened. When God shows up and provides for us at the end of our rope, I love this from Max Lucado. He says this, there are very few monsters who warrant the fear we have of them. There are very few monsters that warrant the fear that we have of them. Sisters and brothers, if God showed up for Hagar at the end of her rope, He's going to show up for you at the end of yours.